Good morning, everyone. Here's your Mormon news update for September 27th, 2024. First off, today we will go to the Salt Lake Tribune for an article about the church's upcoming general conference. It says, a month before the 2020 presidential election, perhaps sensing the tsunami of civic upheaval that would follow the November ballot count, Senior Apostle Dallin Oaks waded into choppy political waters. We will not participate in the violence threatened by those disappointed with the outcome, Oaks, a former Utah Supreme Court justice and next in line to lead the global faith, said at that October's General Conference. In a democratic society, we always have the opportunity and the duty to persist peacefully until the next election. Well, that next presidential election looms, and that has Wheat and Tears blogger Dave B. and others wondering whether Oaks, who returned to the subject in an Easter speech about the Constitution in April 2021, or additional top church leaders will again address U.S. politics at this year's October 5th through 6th General Conference. The blogger is betting that speakers will make some brief mention of this November's showdown between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump without naming them, and simply encourage members to get out and vote for the candidate of their choice. But high-level church leaders have amped up their public voices on the political front in recent years. The governing First Presidency warned last year against straight-ticket balloting, calling it a threat to democracy. Many observers viewed the statement as a reminder to typically Republican-leaning U.S. Latter-day Saints to consider backing Democrats and candidates from other parties. And earlier this year, the church's Utah area presidency urged members to vote for those who have demonstrated integrity, ability, and service to others, regardless of party affiliation. At worldwide conferences, of course, leaders of the global faith generally discuss global issues, so U.S. elections may not even merit lip service. The safest course is to say little or nothing, writes the Wheat and Tears author. On the other hand, what good are prophets, seers, and revelators if they don't address the big issues of the day? When the Constitution is hanging by a thread, don't we expect LDS leaders to at least address it in conference? Then again, he argues, liberal Democratic listeners would hear defend the Constitution by not letting Trump back into the White House, while conservative Republican listeners would hear elect Trump so he can defend the Constitution. We'll all find out in less than 2 weeks if any conference sermons tiptoe into this electoral minefield. Feel free to leave your predictions about the upcoming General Conference in the comments below. Now we will go to the ex-Mormon subreddit for some talk about the seer stone. The post says, I saw a post earlier about the gaslighting the church does about the seer stone in the hat, and how many members just buy into it and say things like it was always taught. It was a completely valid point, and the church absolutely does this. However, I think a large number of active, true-believing Mormons still don't know about the stone in the hat. I'd be surprised if even half of my true-believing loved ones actually know about it, and don't dismiss any knowledge of it as anti-Mormon lies. I was talking to my aunt the other day, and we got onto the topic of why I left the church. I brought up the seer stone and its role in the translation process. She immediately interjected with, oh yes, I know about the Urim and Thummim. I did my best not to scoff and told her that's what I'd thought too, until I learned Joseph Smith barely used the Urim and Thummim at all, whatever the age they even were. I always thought the whole description of them was confusing. Instead, he used his own seer stone, which he'd used in previous scams, to translate the Book of Mormon without the plates in the room at all. I don't think any of what I said made any difference. I could almost see the walls of indoctrination shielding her from the truth. My aunt is wonderful. She's so smart in so many ways, so I'm not trying to belittle her. It's just so frustrating seeing loved ones so thoroughly deceived. I know the church works for some people, but I also think the church hurts its members in many ways, which they don't see while they are in it. Personally, I was 37 years old when I learned that Joseph Smith used a rock and a hat to translate the Book of Mormon. How many years had you been in the church before you learned about it? And now we will go back to the Salt Lake Tribune to learn about which of President Nelson's changes to the church do active believing members like the most. The article says, Russell M. Nelson, who has been president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints since 2018, turned 100 last week. Amid the great display of affection and fanfare that church members showed on him during the celebration, some people wondered aloud which of his many accomplishments he will be remembered for. After all, he has introduced a great many changes, and not just to culture and policy, but also to some of the most sacred doctrinal aspects of the faith, including 4 separate revisions to the temple endowment ceremony. In the Next Mormon Survey 2, fielded in 2022 and 2023, we asked 1,420 Americans who identified as Latter-day Saints which of Nelson's changes were their favorite. Since we didn't want the survey question to be unwieldy, we narrowed the list of changes to 15. Any respondent who judged at least one item as very favorable then received a follow-up question asking which of the changes they were most enthusiastic about. Here, the 1,268 people who qualified for the follow-up question could only choose one of the items they had felt very favorable toward. Here were the top 10 vote-getters. I will start with number 10. Calling the first Asian American and the first Brazilian as apostles. Number 9. Changing temple rituals to expand the role of Eve and give greater equality to women. Number 8. Ending the relationship with the Boy Scouts of America. Number 7. Allowing women and youth to serve as witnesses for baptisms. Number 6. Removing the 1-year waiting period between civil weddings and temple sealings. Number 5. Allowing parents to accompany youth into bishops' interviews. Number 4. Allowing missionaries to call home weekly. Number 3. Using the full name of the church and avoiding Mormon. Number 2. Emphasizing home-based Come Follow Me gospel study. And in the number 1 spot we have moving to a 2-hour church meeting schedule. I think it's quite telling what order members put those in. Do tell me your thoughts in the comments. And now we will go to the church newsroom where it says, during his surgical internship, President Russell M. Nelson once assisted with an operation to amputate a leg filled with highly infectious gangrene. During the difficult procedure, the surgeon became angry with a team member who performed a task poorly and threw the germ-loaded scalpel into President Nelson's arm. Thankfully, President Nelson didn't become infected, but the experience left a lasting impression on him, and decades later, I find myself wondering if the contaminated scalpel that landed in my arm was any more toxic than the venomous contention that infects our civic dialogue and too many personal relationships today. President Nelson told this story during his April 2023 General Conference talk, Peacemakers Needed. He shared it again in a social media video on Thursday, September 19th. The video features selections from the talk and scenes of people choosing contention or peace. Contention is a choice. Peacemaking is a choice, President Nelson says in the video, later adding, anger never persuades, hostility builds no one. To which I would like to respond, but it does build temples. As President Nelson sits in his red velvet chair preaching peacemaking, the church that he runs is causing contention in small towns all across the United States by attempting to build incredibly large Mormon temples in rural areas where the zoning laws often don't permit such large, constantly lit buildings. When the small towns don't submit to the church, instead of making concessions or building their temples in better suited areas, the church sues them. Sounds like the opposite of peacemaking to me. And last up today, we will look at this fun graphic showing beer in pints per day per capita by state in the United States. And no surprise, Utah wins for consuming the least amount of beer per capita in the United States. Mormons are not allowed to drink beer or alcohol of any sort, which is actually weird considering that their own scripture says they can have and should have mild barley drinks. When I googled mild barley drink, the ingredients for beer came up. And that's your update for today, folks. I absolutely hope you have the day that you deserve.